Are you tired of a one-size-fits-all education that leaves some students struggling and others unchallenged? In this episode, I had the pleasure of sitting down with the co-founder of the Modern Classroom Project, Robert Barnett, to explore a revolutionary approach to teaching that's transforming classrooms around the world. We dove into their innovative model built on blended instruction, self-paced learning, and mastery-based progression. And trust me, it's not just theory, it's practical, efficient, and it's working. Have you ever wondered what it takes to create a classroom where every student learns at their own pace, masters each concept before moving on, and feel supported every step of the way? In this podcast episode, we're going to discuss how Modern Classroom started from one teacher's vision to the pillars that make their program so effective, what it takes to design lessons that empower students without burning out teachers, and the real-life classroom strategies that make this all possible. Whether you're a teacher, a parent, or just passionate about education, this episode is packed with insights and actionable ideas to help you rethink how learning happens. Get ready to be inspired and maybe even transform the way that you see education. Welcome to the Foundations of Learning podcast. I hope to inspire you to actively participate in your child's learning journey, fostering a love for knowledge and nurturing the skills necessary for success in a rapidly changing world. Parents, have you ever wondered what your kids are really learning about important topics like taxes, freedom, and responsibility? As an educator, I once had to teach a social studies lesson that only focused on the positives of taxes, completely ignoring the downsides of over-taxation or the importance of personal responsibility. It made me realize how limited the perspective is in many traditional curricula. That's why I'm so passionate about the Tuttle Twins books. These books teach kids both sides of important issues like economics, freedom, and entrepreneurship in a way that's fun, engaging, and easy to understand. They help children think critically and understand the world in a more balanced way. If you're ready to check it out, use my link down below to explore their incredible resources, give your kids the tools to think for themselves, and support my podcast. I am super excited to have you on today, Robert. And I think that what you're doing in the realm of education and really, trying to change how the education system is set up is a super powerful thing to do because, as we know, there are many problems in our education system, particularly in our academic scores. When we look at math and reading scores, they are just not good. We've got I just looked the other day, 35, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, 35% of fourth graders on grade level in math and reading, around 35 to 38%. And I just think that we could be doing so much better. And your philosophy, I think, can do a lot of good. So Robert, you are the co-founder of the Modern Classroom, which focuses on blended, self-paced, and mastery-based learning. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Perfect. Can you walk us through how you went from being just a normal high school math teacher to actually co-founding this company and really what your story is so that my audience can know who you are and what your story is?
Of course, yes, and thank you for having me today. I'm excited to share. I was a math teacher in DC public schools, and then actually I moved abroad and taught in an international school in Switzerland. And in both places, I saw that it was really difficult for me as a teacher to meet every learner's needs in a class of whether it was 10 students or 30 students. Different learners have different needs. And so if I went into the room one day and said, here's my lesson, well, some students would be advanced. They might get the content really quickly, or they might already know it. They would be bored. Some students would be behind, like you just mentioned. A lot of students in this country don't have what we consider grade level skills. They are lost. They are not prepared to understand my lesson, and therefore they don't. And then some students aren't there at all. And if we expect instruction to come from a teacher at the front of the room, then those students will miss out altogether. How I approached this challenge was I stopped giving one lesson at a time to the students who happened to be there. I recorded my instruction on short videos, 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 7 minutes, shared those videos with my students. And now my students could learn at their own paces. They could watch the videos at home or in school. They could pause. They could ask me questions. They could ask each other questions. And I could spend time in class sitting down with my students, getting to know them, providing support. I love teaching that way. And I think my students liked it too. I ended up sharing this with another colleague at my school named Kareem Farah. He taught like this. He liked it. We realized we had something to share with the world. We founded a nonprofit called the Modern Classrooms Project. And, 7 years later, we've trained about 80,000 teachers all over the world and are supporting thousands of teachers in teaching the way that we did in our own classrooms.
That is amazing. So, was Modern Classroom something that was already kind of in motion and you guys just added more of your like philosophy and what you found to work in the classroom, or is this something that you guys like founded?
Well, the organization Modern Classrooms Project is something that we founded. The
Okay.
principles here have teachers have been using, computers and videos to support learning for as long as those things have existed. In fact, if you
Mm-hmm.
think back to a one-room schoolhouse, in many ways that is more of a self-paced, mastery-based kind of learning environment than our classrooms today. So we didn't invent any of the practices that we use. I think what Kareem and I both did in our classrooms was figure out how to package these techniques in a way that really worked for us and worked for our students. And then what we've figured out how to do at Modern Classrooms Project is share those techniques in a way that feels accessible for any teacher anywhere. And, I think the challenges we faced are challenges that are common to teachers everywhere. And that's why we've been able to reach teachers all around the world with this approach to instruction.
Yeah, I agree. And while I was looking at what your program consisted of and the pillars that you guys have, I was thinking even for myself, like when you think about even, like micro schools and homeschoolers, even if they don't know the actual like terminology of what your pillars are, I do know that they are essentially doing this type of teaching with like naturally, right? Like this is a natural way to go about teaching students, especially when you have multiple kids at differing levels and things like that. So I do want to get into the pillars that make up your program so that if people aren't aware, what these are, I would love you to kind of go into detail and explain what it is and what it might look like. So what is blended learning?
Yeah, of course. And I know if you go to our website, you'll see a lot of jargon. So I'm glad to try to cut through that. I mean, when I think of most lessons, whether you're doing this in school or you're working with a tutor or at home or whatever, they usually have a couple of components. First, you want to explain something, some piece of content. Then students practice it to develop their understanding. And then ideally, before they move on to the next lesson, they should show that they understand. They should show that they understand the content because you shouldn't do lesson two until you've done lesson one. And so
Mm-hmm.
those are sort of the three elements of a lesson. Blended instruction refers to, or the way we mean that is that first piece, the explanation, of content doesn't need to be delivered live by a teacher at the front of the room. You can create a video that explains the content. You can find a video online that explains the content. If the student can access the new content from a video, you can spend your time as a teacher working closely with students, answering their questions, helping them with practice, making sure they understand before they move on.
Awesome. So I do want to play a little bit of devil's advocate here, just because I was an educator in the classroom as well. I taught first grade for 4 years, and I actually worked for a district that they called it personalized learning. So similar to what you guys are talking about with Modern Classroom. And when I was watching these videos on I think it was Edutopia, I think is what was on
Mm-hmm.
your website. And I was thinking a lot about how this looked like the personalized learning that my district wanted us to implement. And I know that there were a lot of teachers that were like, oh my gosh, like this sounds great, but also that takes a lot of time to create these lessons. And if they're needing to move on and they're zooming through this with mastery, like how do I get all of these lessons done so that they have access to them and I'm not spending so much time on trying to create these videos while also trying to make sure that I'm ready just for the day of lessons that I'm going to be teaching as well. So what would you say to those teachers that are kind of skeptical about this blended learning approach?
Well, I always say the devil has enough advocates, but I'm happy to respond. Yes, teaching in this way does require work. It takes time to record your own video, as I recommend you do, instead of standing in front of the room explaining it live. I think it's an investment of time, though, that makes teachers' lives and students' lives much easier. Once I've recorded that video once, I don't need to explain this every time I go into the class over and over because I can tell students, watch the video. You can watch the video at home. You can watch the video with your family. You can learn from that, and I'm here to answer your questions. It also makes class time, I think, much more enjoyable. Most teachers I know didn't go into teaching so we can stand at the front of the room and ask our students to be quiet while we talk. We went into teaching because we want to get to know young people and build relationships with them. And it's a lot easier when you don't have to stand at the front of the room and make them all be quiet to listen. The last thing I would say is I think it's much more effective too. When I tried to explain something live in class, some students wouldn't be there, so they missed out. Some students would be bored because they knew it. Some students would be lost. And it would take me a long time to explain because I was always managing behavior. Once I have
Hmm.
that one video, which maybe takes me half an hour to create, my students can watch it at their own paces. They can achieve understanding. I don't have to repeat myself. And that explanation is probably going to be more concise and more clear delivered in video than live with all the distractions of a classroom.
No, and I 100% agree with you on that. It seems like a lot. I think that's what it is for teachers is they feel like there's so much that they're already doing, and I think it sounds overwhelming to them to say like, okay, now I have to sit down, I have to create these videos. But I do agree that I think that we can get our thoughts across a little bit more clear and concise and really like work through that where, like you said, you might have distractions and things like that. And that was one thing that I even noticed because I got to work through lovely COVID and going, remote and having to figure out how to essentially be an online teacher when I had never had to be an online teacher. And so I was doing what you're talking about, where I was creating a lot of videos where I was teaching certain lessons for these students that they could watch, and then I would have them have some sort of independent practice that they could do to try to see if we have mastery in that, and so on and so forth. So I do think that when I was doing it that way, it was so fast to get through a lesson because you didn't have those distractions. So I can see how creating a video would not take as much time. However, when we are looking at like how much time teachers are spending doing this, like what would you suggest to them? Like how did you, when you were first implementing this yourself, how did you find the time to create these videos while also making sure that you were ready for each day? Like, did you take the summer to do it? Like, what tips would you give teachers just barely starting out, feeling overwhelmed, trying to make these online videos?
Yeah, great question. And I'm glad I know for you and a lot of others, this method worked during COVID and online learning. I was doing this well before COVID and know a lot of other teachers who were also, so this works in person as well as, virtually. What I would say is that a video you create, it really doesn't have to be fancy. It's more important for it to be personal. So you can start a video call on Zoom. You can hit record, you can explain something, you end the recording, you have a video. Now all you need to do is put that online where students can see it, and that's it. And so, yes, like I say, it's an investment of time. You need to find time to create those videos, but once you do, it makes your life so much easier, and it may save you time on the other end. Once you have a video created, you can spend time in class giving feedback to students or reviewing their work that otherwise might have needed to wait until after class. So my main advice is make it really simple and, don't worry about making a perfect video. A simple, easy video, even if it contains, even if you misspeak here and there is much better than the alternative, which is kind of a live lesson. Never works for me or my students.
Awesome. I think that the more you can create something that's very simple, I think the better it is for the students as well. So, this is kind of for my elementary teachers because I know elementary teachers like to go ham on things and they like to add all this cute clip art and like do all this cutesy, all these cutesy things. So, I love that you said make it simple because I know that in the hearts of elementary school teachers, making it simple sometimes is really hard for us. We like to try to make it super fun and engaging and add all these pictures. So I love that's simplicity of it. So when you're making these videos, obviously you're going to have students in the lower grades. You don't generally have as large of a academic gap, right? Like if you're in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, you're going to have a little bit of a gap there, but it's not as drastic as once you get into, fourth, fifth, sixth, or even middle school, high school, things like that. So what happens, let's say you have a student that is way below grade level or way above grade level. Do you just have like, I don't know, a list of we'll just talk about math for right now, like a list of math skills, like this is what they need to know from this point to this point. And then you say, okay, I have kids that are testing from an 8th grade level to a 10th grade level, and I need to create videos that span across all of those skill levels? Or do you have like teachers that like share videos? What exactly does that look like?
Yeah, so certainly teachers can share videos and use videos that are online also. I mean, I taught high school math, and so sometimes students needed to review middle school skills. I wasn't going to make videos for every skill, so I would rely on videos that existed online that were good for those kind of prerequisite skills. One thing I would say is that I think every student is capable of learning at grade level. Some just need more time. And so the second pillar of our approach is self-paced learning, where students have the time they need to learn. And for me, that was always the main method of differentiation. I wasn't telling some of my students, okay, you do grade level work, and other students you do below grade level work. That doesn't really, fix gaps. That exacerbates gaps. So the differentiator for me was always the amount of time students have. Some of my students might work through, one lesson per day. Others might take 2 days for a particular lesson. Of course, there are trade-offs there. I had to really prioritize my content and figure out what did I care that every student reached and what lessons maybe were extra kind of should do or aspire to do work. There are compromises you have to make as a teacher between the demands of your curriculum and the needs of your students. But I always felt like when I could give students the time they needed, they always could reach mastery of what I was teaching them.
I think that's super important for anyone to know, no matter what your child's education looks like, whether it's public school, private school, homeschool, micro school, whatever that is. I think that self-paced part is so, so important, because I know even myself growing up, I struggled a lot in math. And I think that I was the student that needed more time. Like if I would have had the ability to go back and rewatch lessons, or I would have had the ability to learn at the pace that I needed, I think I would have done much better and been less frustrated in math growing up, because I realized once I took my elementary math, which is so sad, but I took my elementary math courses and I was like, holy crap, I didn't even realize how many holes that I had myself in just elementary skills, that I was like, I didn't think I was this bad at math. But then I started to realize like, oh my gosh, there's a lot of holes that I didn't realize I had. And I think that could have been fixed through this self-paced learning. So I think that's super awesome that is one of your pillars, because I think, honestly, I think that might be one of your most important pillars. I mean, obviously, I think mastery-based is as well, but I think self-paced is so, so important.
Well,
So, go ahead.
I'm glad you see that. I think sometimes people get fixated on video. Video is really just a tool to give students the opportunity to learn not at the teacher's pace, but their own pace. Every young person is different, and some need more time and some need less. We have to build classrooms that respect that.
Help your child become a confident reader with letters and sounds. This structured curriculum includes lesson plans, games, and multisensory activities to make learning letters fun and effective. Get started today at k3homeschoolfoundations.com or check out the link down below. Yes, I think that's super important. And I think that the way that we have things set up right now, I mean, generally speaking, you do mostly whole group instruction, you do some small group instruction, and if you're really lucky, you can get to that one-on-one piece with those students that really need it. But even then, you're not really pacing it at what they need. And the small group time is so minimal in your time that you have, that I think that it's so important that we can utilize the wonderful technology that we do have. And like you said, like, I think it's important for teachers to understand that, yeah, it's a lot of time in the beginning, but these are the skills that the children are going to need no matter what. I mean, we're now learning right through the science of reading, like, here are the skills that they actually need to have. It's not going to like change. This is how our language works, right? Same thing with math. Math is the same way. I know that there's a new movement coming around that's like the science of math or whatever. And they're kind of also going into this, like, yeah, just as there is these particular skills that you need in reading and writing, and they build upon themselves, and you have to be sequential in the way you're teaching them, the same thing applies to math as well. And so I think it's important in all realms that we're looking at, like, okay, these are skills that they're going to need, and they're really not going to change. Even if your curriculum changes, I don't think that that's a problem, because they're going to need these skills, and these are the skills in the order in which they need them, you know? So I
Exactly.
think that's super important. So let's talk about what is, because we kind of went over self-paced, what is mastery-based learning? What would that look like?
Yeah, great question. I mean, mastery-based learning is the idea that you shouldn't move from one lesson to the next just because it was Monday and now it's Tuesday, but that you should really understand lesson one before you move to lesson two. If you try lesson two and you don't understand lesson one, it's going to be hard for you to succeed, and you may start to doubt your confidence. A lot of people say this to me about math. Oh, well, I never totally understood fractions, and then we got to, you know, multiplying by fractions. I didn't really understand that, and then it's dividing by fractions, and then all of a sudden, you're in high school and you have functions that have fractions in them, and it's like, it's really difficult to do that. It's like almost a foreign language because you haven't understood the basics. And so mastery-based learning is about making sure that before students advance, they show mastery. And that's how it was in my class and how it is in thousands of modern classrooms around the world. In order to get from lesson one to lesson two, you have to show understanding. And that prevents those learning gaps from forming. And it also gives students self-esteem because they say, okay, yeah, wow. Instead of feeling like it's Wednesday and I didn't understand Monday and Tuesday, so I'm not going to understand Wednesday, they might feel like, okay, wow, like Monday's lesson was really hard. It took me 2 days to learn it, but I understood it. I'm proud of myself. I realized that when I apply myself, I can learn something challenging. And that's what mastery-based learning creates.
Awesome. And with that mastery based learning, so I do have to ask, just for educators that are trying to wrap their brains around how this is going to work in their classroom, and how to really, like, how much whole group instruction are you providing? How much time are you spending in small group instruction? Or are we just kind of omitting some of that and allowing the students to more move at their own pace through these videos? Like, what does that look like? What would that look like in a normal classroom?
Yeah, so I can talk about my classroom, and every teacher does this a little differently. But I used to have a whole class sort of warm up at the beginning of every day. I liked that for building community. I liked that for giving announcements. Sometimes during a unit, I might have a particular lesson or discussion or simulation or activity that worked best whole class. So I would do a day of whole class instruction. But for the most part, class started with whole class instruction, and then the rest of the class was a combination of small group and one-on-one. One, I think, misconception of classrooms that use technology is students are all just doing their own thing on computers the whole time. That's not at all the case. If students are working on similar things, and maybe they're working on paper off screen, they will work together. They'll naturally want to work in small groups. And as a teacher, you can, assign groups and have students working together. And then you can also just meet with students one-on-one, check in to see how they're doing, how they're learning, etc. So for me, I would say, if my class is 45 minutes, it's 10 minutes at the beginning doing something all together. The next 30 minutes are kind of me pulling small groups, students working together, on their own, me checking in one-on-one with students, and then, the last 5 minutes is just wrapping up. But there's a role for whole class instruction, but the goal really is to spend more time in small groups and one-on-one. In my experience as a teacher and a learner, that's where learning really happens.
100%. And I think that we also see this kind of like what I said, with these micro schools. Like I've seen a lot of different micro schools that are kind of taking the approach that you're talking about, or even other schools that are opening that are taking more of your approach of what you're saying as well. And they're using these pillars to teach, and they're finding a lot of success with it, which I know as well, that you guys have statistics as well for how well these teachers are doing and what their test scores look like, before and after that they are actually making a change, and that they are learning what they need. And so I think that it's something that for some reason, I don't know why, but I think it takes a minute for these different theories or philosophies or whatever you want to call them to take hold and for people to adopt them. And I really, if there is any educator out there listening, I really hope that you guys are listening and absorbing and knowing that it is possible to do this in your classroom, because I think this is a big step that we can take to help kids reach the mastery that they deserve to reach in these topics. So one thing I did want to ask you, there was a part on your website that talked about learning design, which I was looking at. You have different courses that educators can take, and I know districts can also sign up to do trainings and things like that. But it was talking about learning design. So what is learning design?
Yeah, that's another good question. I mean, one thing I would say before I talk about that is you're totally right. There's great innovation happening in micro schools and small schools and, parents who are homeschooling. I was a teacher in a big traditional public school, and this worked for me there. So, wherever you are, you could be in the most innovative environment or the most traditional environment. There are things that you as a teacher can do, and that's why we created Modern Classrooms Project, especially as a nonprofit, to share those things for free. So thank you, I would also say, for exploring our online courses, which are at modernclassrooms.org. When we talk about learning design, we talk about taking all the things that I've just talked about, videos that explain content, collaborative sort of practice activities that students do, mastery checks to ensure understanding. How do you organize this in a coherent way so that in my classroom there might have been 20 students working on 4 different lessons? That's kind of difficult to keep organized, right? You need good systems. You need a place online where all the content is accessible. You need a classroom that is organized in such a way that students can work together and work independently. You have to have good systems that tie everything together. And so um, that's what we mean by learning design, taking these discrete elements of a lesson and putting them together so that students can really learn and achieve mastery at their own paces.
Perfect. So, what would you say to maybe somebody that has a young child or even elementary school teachers that say, okay, this sounds great, and you are a high school math teacher, but my young kids just are not responsible enough to be able to, take hold of their own learning and go with it and be responsible enough to really gain mastery in these skills and learn on their own?
That's totally fair. I was a high school teacher. I have not been an elementary school teacher, and I have young kids myself, and I hope this is how they'll learn. But they're still pre-K and under, so I haven't been through elementary school as a parent. With that said, we work with a lot of elementary school teachers who do this really well. In fact, in some way, Modern Classroom is an easier fit in elementary because teachers there are used to sort of small group one-on-one instruction versus secondary environments, which are always kind of one size fits all. In terms of can students handle this? I mean, I think if you're an elementary teacher, you've got to have really clear systems, especially clear systems if you're an elementary teacher, right? If your students can't read that well, then you can't rely on written directions. But we've seen teachers do all sorts of color coding and stickers and emoji that, help students understand what they need to do. In general, I think that students will rise to the level of expectation that we hold them to. And so if we think, okay, our kids are not really capable of independent learning, so we have to lecture to them. That's what our that's what our kids will be capable of, right? Sitting and listening to lecture. If we say our kids are capable of taking some ownership of their learning, and we're going to work hard to come up with good systems for this. I've seen this done well in kindergarten classes, first grade, second grade, and it's, you need to have good systems, take the time to orient students, but it is possible. And in our on our website, in our online courses, just the examples and testimonials and materials from elementary teachers who have made it work. Ultimately, and this is perhaps the most important thing I can say to any teacher listening to this, if you don't think this will work for you and your students, it won't. This is something that you need to decide whether you want to do this. And I don't know you or your students, so I would never tell you this is how you should teach. And I trust your judgment as an educator. For me, this is what works well for my students. For the educators I've seen at all grade levels using it, this works well for their students. As a parent, this is what I want for my kids. Like there's a lot of, as you mentioned, a lot of evidence behind this approach. But ultimately, it's up to the teacher to understand their students, their school context, their style, and determine if it will work. If you think it will work, you're right. There are ways to make it work. If you think it won't, you're also right. And I would never want to pressure you to do anything that doesn't feel like it's best for you or your students.
I think that's really great advice. And I do think that I personally think that the young kids are responsible enough if you give them the opportunity to do it. In my classroom, I held my students to very, very high expectations, and we had like a certain level of respect that we had with each other. And then in the same sense, I also gave them a lot of responsibility. So, and I do want to say too, like you kind of said in, earlier, that every single teacher might implement this just a little bit different. Like I had said, I worked for a district that was implementing something called personalized learning, which is basically like the same kind of process that you are talking about and with these different pillars. And it was really, really, really overwhelming in the beginning. It really was. And it was really hard to figure it out. And there were teachers within the school that I was working in that were, that I felt like they were pros at it. And I was like this amateur trying to implement these things, and it was very frustrating. And I was oftentimes trying to emulate exactly what these other teachers were doing, and it wasn't working for me. So I think it's important for teachers to understand too that you can implement these things, but the way that you implement it might look very different. And it's going to depend on, like you said, your teaching style, the students in your classroom, and things like that. Because even once I thought I kind of had a hold on like what I was doing with it, I might get a new group of kids, and the systems that I had in place for the kids prior might not be exactly what the system or the systems that these kids need as well. So I think it's something that we have to kind of look at as educators as something that's flexible to the students that are in your classroom, and then also for yourself, because even in this beautiful model that we have here, it can look very different from classroom to classroom, and what works for each kid might not work for the next group of kids, right?
That's exactly right. And that's why I tried to lay out this framework to say a lesson has some direct instruction, some practice, some demonstration of mastery. That's going to look different in a kindergarten class from a high school class. That's going to look different from a math class to an English class. That's going to look different from two English classes in the same hallway because one English teacher has a different personality and style or has different students. So yes, you do need to take this approach and make it work for you, but it's flexible. I would never say all your videos have to be exactly 5 minutes. Some concepts might need an 8-minute video. That's fine. I would say in general, try to keep your videos short, but how that actually works, you know, you listening to this will know that for your context way better than I will.
Yeah, and as I was watching the Edutopia, you have one for elementary and you have one for high school as well. So if there are educators that are curious, like if you're an elementary school teacher and you're like, I wonder what this might look like, I think the teacher that you showed, like with that second grade teacher, I think that that is just as good that like a kindergarten teacher could implement that as well. They just might need more pictures instead of words, right? Like I think on their little map that they had, it had more words that they had to look at and like, this is where we're going to go. Whereas kindergartners are going to need a little bit more with like pictures, and it's going to take a lot longer. That's one thing I want to kind of note as well for elementary school teachers. It's going to take a lot longer for the students to get used to what the expectations are and what the systems are. So even if it feels like you're wasting time for, however long it takes to make this a well-oiled machine, is not wasted time. It's a process to get these littles that are just barely starting to understand like how to school, and then let alone be responsible for their learning and have all of these procedures and things that they have to follow to find success. I think is something that you have to kind of give yourself grace and your students grace, and that eventually it'll work, and to take like little itty bitty bites out of it as well. Because if you try to do it all at once, I feel like it's very overwhelming. And if you try to just implement, a couple of these things and then keep adding on and adding on and adding on, it'll be easier for you as well if you're starting out. At least in my experience, I obviously have not taken any of your trainings, and I didn't get much training, to be honest with you, on these pillars. So I would have been very grateful if I would have had something else that could have shown me what this might look like, and seeing it in other classrooms more effectively that way. So with your trainings, kind of talking about these procedures and the steps that they need to take, right? Do they kind of walk teachers through the steps they need to take? So for example, procedures that they need to learn, or how to collaborate effectively. Because when you're dealing with these little kids, like they often don't know how to actually help each other. Their way of helping is usually like, here's the answer, instead of having a conversation and being like, well, do you know how to do X, Y, and Z? Like, what is 2 + 2? What is, they kind of just give the answer. So that's one thing that I learned, is I had to teach them what that would look like and what that would sound like. And we had to practice it together so that they knew how to collaborate effectively. And then also we had to practice staying focused and engaged in a task on their own without me being there, making sure that they are staying on task and focused. So do your courses kind of walk teachers through that? Because I think that if you're going to make all of this work, those are very important pieces that we have to have solid for the mastery-based and self-paced and blended learning to really come together and work.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, these are the challenges that every teacher faces, and so they're the challenges we've tried to address in our courses. And we're a nonprofit organization. All of our material is totally free online. If your school or district is interested, or you're interested, you can also sign up for what we call a mentorship program, where you'd actually work with a teacher, in a similar grade level, who does this in their own classrooms every day and can share with you, here's how I get my students to collaborate. Here's what my mastery checks look like, etc. So we have tons of free resources that include, examples from elementary, middle, high school. And if you want more, there's ways to work with experts in our network as well.
I think that's amazing. And coming out of just, because usually you'll go and you'll observe classrooms in your district or in your school or whatever. And I think it's super awesome that you guys have that mentorship program to learn from somebody that's in your exact grade. Because as far as when they were telling us like, we're going to do personalized learning in our district, there were a lot of teachers that they heard all this information, felt overwhelming, and they were like, I don't really know how to implement this in an effective way. And there were a couple of teachers in the district that were doing it, but you were maybe a kindergarten or first grade teacher, and they were making you watch like a fourth grade teacher do it. Right. And it's so different when you're looking at fourth graders versus first and kindergarten. Like they're totally different on the developmental scale and so many other things. And so I think that's super awesome that you have that mentorship, because without it, I think that it's going to be a lot more frustrating. But you can take how they're finding success and try to implement it into your classroom. I also love that you said that there's resources already created through teachers that are doing this and are being successful in this, so that you can go and you can get these resources. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I think that's one thing that teachers need to remember, is you never have to reinvent the wheel. There's all kinds of other teachers out there that are doing things that you can use their resources as well.
Absolutely right. Yeah, well said. And teachers learn best from each other, and so that's why we've tried to curate all these resources for teachers to use.
That's awesome. So I just want to give everyone listening an idea of all of the resources you have. I know that you've talked a little bit about like districts can reach out and there's some trainings and stuff, but what resources could they have access to? And then is there any other resources that you would suggest as well to help somebody get started on this journey?
Yeah, I mean, what I'll recommend is we have a free course. It's at learn.modernclassrooms.org. That is the place to start. Once you open that course, you'll see there's a lot of pathways you can go down, but it's best to start with one course that introduces the model. That is what I'd recommend. If you're more of a reader, I have a book that's called Meet Every Learner's Needs, and it's the book version of this model. So if you prefer to read or listen to the book, I have my book as well. But you can start with a free online course, and between the book and or the online course, I think that will be all you really need to understand this model and how to use it, and then the other resources will be available to you. You'll figure out from those introductory places where you want to explore further next.
Okay, perfect. And then as far as like when we're looking at skills, right, that we're teaching, do you have any suggestions for teachers besides like, I don't know, just look at your state core and decide as, your district, because you kind of already do this as an educator, but decide as your district or your school or whatever, these are the important skills that they need to know in math, reading, and writing or science or whatever it is, and kind of follow that to create these videos for the blended learning, self-paced learning, etc. Or what would you suggest for that, or just follow your curriculum that you have?
Yeah, I mean, this we don't provide or recommend a particular curriculum or, particular standards. Like teachers,
Mm-hmm.
this is a model you can use to teach whatever skills or standards you have. So I would agree that
Okay.
you find what you need to teach. You can teach it from the front of the room in a way that, in my experience, is stressful for the teacher and ineffective for a lot of students. Or you could think about teaching it in a different way that will be perhaps more effective and more enjoyable. So I don't have great recommendations on content to teach, but
Mm-hmm.
I hope that what we've created is helpful in terms of the how to deliver it.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, it was so awesome having you on and kind of going through what this process is, what it looks like. And I think that it's something I think needs to be implemented in the public schools, just because, like I said, we're a little bit low on our academics, and I think a lot of it has to do with the way that we are teaching. Unfortunately, I think that it is. We're seeing this now that like, okay, if we can make it more self-paced, if we can make it more mastery based, if we can really dive into the skills and not just follow a curriculum and say, okay, today's lesson 1, tomorrow's lesson 2, lesson 3, and so on and so forth, and really try to meet the kids where they're at, I think that we're going to find a lot more success in our schools, and that students are going to have a lot less gaps academically. And I think it's even going to help them just to know how to learn on their own outside of school, right? Like, I think that's an important skill that this is teaching as well, is how can I learn on my own and be responsible for my learning and know that I'm learning without even an adult telling me this is what I need to learn and sit here and listen and all of that stuff. So I think that that is super awesome. And I hope that educators check it out, or even if parents are trying to do certain things like this, I think even in a homeschool environment, you could implement this and create videos for your kids, or find videos on YouTube to provide to them as well, so that they can move at the pace they need if you're busy with other kids, and so on and so forth. But is there anything else that you would like to say to my audience before we end this conversation?
No, just to say thank you for listening. Again, use your professional judgment to see whether this is good for you or not, whether you're a teacher or, I think if you are homeschooling your kids, you probably do a lot of this already, right? You
Mm-hmm.
don't you don't send them ahead to things that they're not ready for. It's more
Yeah.
of a tutoring type relationship. But if you're a teacher in a traditional public school with 30 kids, know that this approach can work also. It worked for me. It's worked for thousands of others. And I hope you'll come away from this conversation and perhaps from my book or from the Modern Classroom's website with even more that helps you succeed.
Awesome. And I will link I'll link the website down below in the description just so that my audience can access that. And then if you have any other links you'd like me to share, I can also share that in the description as well. But I do urge everyone to go and check out Modern Classrooms because I think that it is what our schools need today to really help our students find success and confidence in their learning. But I am so glad I had the chance to talk to you, Rob, and I hope that you have a good rest of your day and that you continue doing the awesome things you're doing to help educators be the best that they can be.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you for all that you do as well.